Today we're going to be looking at some problems that we're having with the BMW and how it's running. I'm trying to get it ready for a long trip, and of course for a long trip I need it to be reliable. And this car is perfectly reliable for about 30 minutes. Once the car gets to normal operating temperature, it seems to lose power, just randomly. It's pretty bizarre. If I turn the car off then and turn it back on, the power is resumed for a short period of time, at which point it just disappears again. So I don't know what is actually causing this. I've pretty much gone through most of the fuel system to try to figure it out. So I've also assuming that it's something temperature related, or a temperature control sensor that gets reset when I turn off the car and turn it back on, but then finds its value again as incorrect and screws everything up. So we could be dealing with an airflow meter, we could be dealing with something on the intakes or on the fuel side, which would be a fuel pressure problem or something. Maybe the fuel tank is got a lot of dirt in it, and you know, it collects on the filter on the bottom of the intake of the fuel pump, and then when you turn the car off, that all lowers to the bottom and then raises again. But it doesn't seem like that makes sense when it only happens at the natural operating temperature of the vehicle. So I'm wondering if that's the issue, but I don't think it is. We're going to get a fuel pressure tester and see if we can test the fuel pressure. We're going to replace a couple of the temperature sensors in the car, and maybe we'll actually pick up a replacement airflow meter, see if that solves our problem. There are a couple other things we can look at. The car still stumbles a little bit during normal driving, even in that first 30 minutes, which is a little bit of a concern as well. So we're just going to kind of go through some problems and see if we can see anything obvious. These cars are notorious for running poorly when there's a vacuum leak. But every vacuum hose on this car is pretty much new, except for one. So we'll kind of take a deeper look into that as well. Let's get to it. I am replacing the 4 temperature sensors that are mounted up here on top of the thermostat housing. That's right, I said there are 4, and I'm not totally certain if one of these isn't triggering something that's not going right. And once again, these are things that can be problematic on these cars, so I'm just replacing them.
Yes, this rocks!
So I ran it up to temp with the fuel pressure gauge on it, and the fuel pressure looks rock solid. What else could be causing the issue? I went with the fuel tank theory.
The sum of the square roots of any two sides of an isosceles triangle is equal to the square root of the remaining side.
That's a right triangle, you idiot! Go!
I know the evaporative system on this thing is leaking anyways, because when I fill up the tank, I can smell fuel. It was an excuse to fix that anyway. So here is our fuel tank right here. We have some covers we have to take off. This one and this one. And there's one all the way up there at the front. You see I've got a big black bucket here. That's 14 gallons. The car does have supposedly a 22 gallon tank. It's about half full. So there's probably 10 or 12 gallons in there. So I need something big enough to capture it. Gas is really expensive right now, so we don't want it to go to waste. So we're going to use this bin, and luckily our fuel tank has a nozzle right there to drain it. So we're going to open that up, we're going to drain out the fuel tank, and then we're going to see what happens. So the fuel coming out of the tank looks pretty clean, which doesn't bode well for my theory that there's crap getting caught in the actual filter on the fuel pump.
You suck, you jackass.
If that's not the problem, then I'm not sure what it could be. We'll see when the tank is drained. Bring it down and take a look. You can see we've got a pretty decent amount of spilled gas under there, unfortunately. What are you gonna do? I prepared as best I could, but the gas inevitably is right here. 5 gallons in this, about a gallon in there, and this bucket has the rest of the gas. I don't know if that black bucket is actually fuel safe. So the fuel could be eating through it right now as we are speaking. So we definitely want to drop the tank, take a look and fix whatever needs to be fixed, replace the evaporative hoses, and then get the gas back in the car as soon as possible. I don't have a lot of faith that crap in the tank is what our problem is, because I didn't see anything come out of that drain tube. That looked clean as a whistle. If it's not crap in the tank, there's not a whole heck of a lot else it could be. So yeah, bit of a stumper. Let's get the tank out, take a look. Well, now that we have this fantastic gas smell in here, let's go ahead and disconnect the battery. A couple things we gotta do, since we're gonna remove the evaporative tank as well. First thing I'm gonna do is disconnect the tank from up here. So let's get to that. All right, fuel tank disconnected. Next thing I'm gonna do is remove the evaporative tank, and there's a piece in the fuel filler neck that I want to kind of undo first. So let's get to that. All right. So inside here are the evaporative tank hoses. There's one here. It goes to a charcoal canister somewhere. And then there's these 4 right here. So we're gonna be taking those off. And the tank is right inside here. So this tank right here is gonna come off. I'm not sure how exactly, but we'll figure it out. So the first thing is to get these grommets.
A few moments later.
Loose out of here to make this tank more mobile. And we already know, I can see right there that this hose is cracked. So these are definitely leaking, or at least it appears that they're leaking. So what we're gonna do is get that grommet out of there so that these hoses can move a little freer. Well, let's take the tank off in the car. Now this tank looks like it's held on with one whole bolt right there. I don't know if that's true, but that's what it looks like. There's a hose up here, and then there's a bunch of other ones down at the bottom. They're being held up by the fact that that rubber grommet is in the...
Well, we're waiting.
We're gonna have to push those rubber grommets through there in order to make this happen. So let's do that. This one is really tough to get to. So we're gonna leave that one go and see if we can get the tank out without it. BMW, in their infinite wisdom, put these on. They are one clampies, and they're really, really difficult to cut off. Usually you'd use a Dremel, but there's enough gas in my garage at this point, gas fumes, that that's probably a bad idea. I'm not really worrying too much about the hoses because I don't really care. We're gonna replace those hoses. So we just have to get these clamps off without breaking the pieces of the tank. Like that. That piece is probably plastic, it feels like. Well, here's the tank. Pretty simple. So here's the tank, 4 lines removed. Here's our 4 lines. 5th line plugs in up at the top, right here. Let's get our piece in here. Go. And that's ready to go back in as soon as we have our stuff. So let's drop the tank. There's some bolts up in here. We're gonna take out. We'll go ahead and at least try. And if we're lucky, we won't break any. First cover off. There are a total of 3 protective plates that I have to remove in order to get the tank out. Once the tank is out, we just have 2 bolts, one that holds on each of the tank straps. Shockingly, one of these just would not come out no matter what I did. I used a hammer to bang in the socket. We used vice grips. Every trick in the book. Finally had to resort to bringing out the hacksaw. Normally I would just go ahead and use the Dremel and cut the bolt, but given how much gas spilled on my floor, I didn't have the luxury of using that sort of thing. Inevitably, I ended up using bolt cutters to cut the bolt. Of course, I wish I had done this 5 minutes into this process, but unfortunately, well, hindsight is 20/20. So next I disassembled the tank and removed the fuel pump and everything else. Then I went at it hard with a wire brush to try to clean up all the dirt and filth and everything else that was on the tank, and even scrape off some of the rust. Next we hit it with a hose and a lot more wire brush scraping. After we were done with the hose, we went ahead and turned it over, drained everything out. Then I used a vacuum to try to vacuum out all of the remaining water that might be in the tank. Next I set about using a hammer and a punch to try to straighten out the bottom of the tank. It did have a little bit of a dent on it. Once that was done, I went ahead and took a wire wheel to the whole thing to clean off everything else that was left. Now some of these tubes had pinholes in them that were letting air into the tank. So for this I used a sealant that seals up the rust pinholes and all that stuff so that the tank would essentially be airtight. Then I hit the entire tank with Core Seal, which removes and neutralizes the rust. On the bottom of the tank was a pretty thick layer of either some sort of coating that's put on by the factory, or maybe just dirt and oil and everything else. So I used the wire brush to clean that off pretty thoroughly. Then we applied the Core Seal to that area as well. Next, we went and took the wire brush to all of the other components, the 3 plates that we pulled off, and taped everything up so it was ready for paint. Nice fresh coat of cheap black paint. Then I used a compressor hose to make sure that the sealant that we put on had actually sealed the hoses, and it looks like everything checks out. Now we have our 4 rubber hoses we could put back in the car. The only thing that's left to do is the other evaporative hose. And we kind of have a problem with that one. I'll show you what I mean. So this right here is the other evaporative hose line. Didn't actually come out of the car. It's just dangling right there though. Anyway, so this you can see connects to a hard line. And this hard line is well rusted, which is a problem because obviously we're trying to eliminate problem points in this system. Luckily, because it's a BMW, once you get up to this point up here, right past here, there's no more rust. So what I could do is I could get a butt connection, recreate this hard line up to here, and then you know, fix the problem. But a butt connection can leak and all that stuff. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this off in the good section where it's not rusted. We're just gonna use rubber line to go up to the regular spot. So the rubber line will just start here and then go through here to where it's supposed to go. That way, well, it fixes our problem. And we only have one new connection instead of a butt connection and then another connection. So that's the plan. We'll see how that goes. I didn't film putting the tank back in the car. The reinstall is the exact opposite of what you saw me doing taking it out. Well, except the bolt cutters. Now the other piece of the puzzle is the mass airflow sensor. These are notoriously problematic on these cars, and I wanted to give it a full refurb. There is rubber gasket around this area, so you have to cut it off with a knife. And then I pried it apart with a screwdriver. Once that was done, I went ahead and took the connector piece off. It's just 2 screws. And then I used some needle nose pliers to go ahead and disconnect those wires. Once you do that, it's super easy to loosen up this end and pull off the little rotating screw. And the whole reason why you do something like this is because you're going to take a piece of paper which is rough enough to kind of smooth out these connection areas. So I used some paper to clean up the arm, and then I used that same paper on the sweeper as well where the arm touches. You just want to kind of try to remove the grooves that were in there. Now what I do after this is I'm going to go ahead and kind of rebend the arm that touches those grooves so that it can go into a new groove. Once you're done with that, go ahead and put the arm back on, reconnect all of our cables, get everything back in there situated the way it's supposed to be. Then we go ahead and put the connector back on. Get everything totally buttoned up. Make sure it spins freely the way that it's supposed to. The last thing I do is just use a voltmeter so that I can make sure that we actually put everything back together and it is reading properly. And all that's left to do is seal it up, so put some gasket sealer on there and put it back on. And we have a completely refurbished mass airflow sensor for basically the cost of, I guess, a little bit of gasket sealer. If you're a paintless dent guy who lives in the US Northeast and you may want to plug your biz, or maybe just come hang out with me, have a couple of beers, and fix a few issues, well, let me know in the comments. In the next video, you're going to see whether all this work I just did will actually fix the issue. Why am I spending all this time, energy, and money on this old beat-up 733 that isn't worth anything? Well, it can only be for the love of cars. And if this moron can do it, I know you can too. So go out there and find that one that you always wanted, fix it up, make it run again, and have fun. And I'll see you in the next one.